All right, let's continue talking about Darwin. So, what did he notice? It says two important unexpected patterns. The first involved the finches. He noted different physical characteristics, such as body size, beak shape, or feather. So, the beaks are they big beaks, thick beaks, thin beaks? Why compared to the mainland finch? At every location, there was a striking similarity between fossils of existing species and the living species in this, extinct species and the living species. So those were things that he noticed. Okay, so this is, right, the review for this area, for this chapter. All right. So, yes, Thomas Malthus, he talked about geographic similarities, differences among fossils, and so during that time, he thought about evolution, this idea that species evolve, that species change over time. But Darwin did not publish his paper for a very long time. He put it away. He thought, wow, this is too controversial. I can't talk about this. Okay, so 1842. So this was in the 1800s. My gosh, that seems like so long ago, but it really wasn't that long ago. First draft, 1842. It sat. He didn't publish it until much later, right? 1859. Now, why? What got him to publish it? Well, this guy right here. His name is Alfred Wallace. Alfred Wallace was a contemporary of Darwin. He was a younger guy. He really looked up to Darwin, and he did his own travels. He was very interested in insects and butterflies. The video that you guys see, you'll see how Alfred Wallace's journey, I mean, people were pretty tough back in those days. The things they survived through. And Alfred Wallace thought of evolution just like Darwin did. He thought of natural selection just like Darwin did. And he actually sent a paper to Darwin and said, hey, what do you think about this? And at that point, Darwin goes, uh-oh, I better publish my paper. And so actually both of them, when Darwin published his book, this is the famous book. It's called On the Origin of Species by Darwin. He gave credit to Alfred Wallace also. And it was the book that really changed our views on life. Okay. Before this book, people thought all organisms were put on Earth by the Creator at the same time. Organisms are fixed, no additions, no subtractions. Earth is about 6,000 years old. After, there was this idea that organisms change over time. Some organisms have gone extinct. Earth is more than 6,000 years old. So, and the book sold. I mean, it was off the shelves. And some people went, yes, we agree. And the thing about Darwin that was such a big deal is he had gone through his voyage and he collected a lot of species and he can show, look at this versus that and so on. Yeah. And so there were people who backed him up and who agreed. And of course there were people who didn't. And now fast forward, more than 100 years, everything we've learned since Darwin, everything we learn supports the theory of evolution. And genetics and DNA support it even further. Okay. So, it says, after putting off publishing his thoughts on natural selection for more than 15 years, Darwin did so only after Alfred Wallace independently came up with the same idea. The two men published their ideas 1858, and Darwin published a more detailed treatment, Origin of Species, sparking wide debate discussion. All right, so we do know that it does happen, and specifically what's happening, again, population changing over time. It's a change in allele frequencies. Remember alleles? Alleles are different forms of a gene, right? And we can see this actually happening. So imagine all the individuals in the population, okay? They all have their own genes. If we had like a pool, all the genes. It's called a gene pool. Okay, so here, imagine these tigers. Most tigers we see are orange, but once in a while we see these albino tigers, right? Or white furred tigers. And if this was the gene pool, mostly here, proportion of orange fur pigment versus white, a lot of orange. But over time, we can have more white tigers in the population, and that would be evolution, because changes in lines of descent over time or changes in allele frequencies over time. So we can witness this, we can actually see this. Now, this is a really strange thought that students really have a hard time with. In reality, individuals do evolve, right? And I think that's what's hard. Like, we could say, I'm evolving, I'm changing, that's right, okay? But when we're looking at evolution, we're not just looking at individuals, okay? Because individuals come and go, they die, they survive. We're looking at the population. How does the population change? Are elephants getting larger or smaller? What's happening to fish and fish populations, etc.? So in biology, we focus on populations and how populations are evolving. And we're looking at allele frequencies. So what are the mechanisms for evolution? This is an incredibly important slide. Please look at it, okay? Mutations, genetic drift, migration, natural selection. These are the 4 mechanisms of evolution, okay? Meaning what causes evolution. Now, mutation is a huge one. If I can highlight bold star mutation, okay? Mutation is the only way we get new alleles, okay? It's the ultimate source of diversity, okay? Guaranteed that will be a test question, no doubt, okay? We've talked about mutations, alteration in base pair sequences. So changing the DNA. So that video you watched about coronavirus, okay? COVID-19 was a result of mutations. And it just so happened that it's affecting humans, okay? There are coronaviruses in animals. Usually does not infect people, but in this case it did. And it's novel, it's new. So we don't know how the population is going to react. And unfortunately, some people really have a hard time with the virus and it's killing people. So they talk about, the death rates like 1 to 2%. But that is with medical intervention. Without medical intervention, the death rate can be 10% or 15% in the elderly or the immunocompromised. So mutations, ultimate source of variation in the population and mechanism for evolution. Genetic drift, right? What happens to the gene pool? What if a bunch of people died, or let's not use people, what if a bunch of lizards died? Well, when they die, their genes go with them. That changes the population. Or what if all of a sudden migrations happen and the population moves all the way to this area? Well, that changes too. Migration, moving this way, that way. As individuals leave, they change the population here and the population here, right? And then natural selection, how nature or how the environment changes and how that creates forces that influence the population. So for the rest of this lecture, we're going to look at each source. Okay, so mutations. Okay. So direct change in the DNA, ultimate source of genetic variation. Okay. So how can that happen? We talked about genes and alleles, which are inherited, somatic or reproductive. Reproductive, right? Because that's passed on. What causes mutations? We talked about that, right? If cell division issues happen, environmental factors, radiation, chemicals, it can cause mutations. Now, this idea, mutations are random. We We can't predict exactly when and where it's going to happen. We can have ideas that it happens this often, right? But they don't happen at a specific, like it's going to happen now or happen now, right? So they're random. And where they happen, where on the chromosome, that's random. We cannot predict ahead of time which individuals will have which mutations. We cannot predict whether the consequences will be benign, harmful, or useful. Now, that's one of the things we talked about when we got into DNA. We said mutations can be harmful. Most of the time we think of harmful. They can have no effect because if the protein's still the same, that's no effect. Or sometimes they can actually be beneficial. So the idea of brown hair versus blonde hair or brown eyes versus blue eyes, well, depending on the environment, there could be some benefits, okay? So here they show, again, a change in the DNA, changes the protein, changes the individual. And if that affects individuals' reproductive success, then that could be an agent to evolution. All right. Genetic drift. Random, again, this idea of random changes in allele frequencies in a population. So imagine here's the population, here's the gene pool, and the gene pool changes over time. So what are examples of genetic drift? Okay, so founder effect and bottleneck effect, those are examples of genetic drift. So let's say a small number of individuals leave a population and become founding members in a new population. When they leave the population and set up new shop with a new population, now there's a new gene pool. And that could be an agent for evolution for that gene, for that population. Founders may have different allele frequencies than the original source, particularly if they're small. So usually with founder effect, we see more of an effect with small populations. So this is called polydactyly. Poly means many, dactyly, we're talking about digits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Whoa, yes, we can have extra fingers, we can have extra toes. We see that this is more common in the Amish. And the question is why? So imagine the first population, the green is normal fingers and toes, the blue is extra fingers and toes. Okay, so the blue is pretty small percentage of the whole population. But if a small slice left and set up shop somewhere else, now the blue is a larger percentage of this population. And as people have babies, then we'll see the condition more often. And so this population over time is different than that population. So that would be an example of founder effect. Bottleneck effect. Think of a bottle. Here's a bottle and here's the neck. Okay, so this is big, this is small. So here, all these different colors are showing like different genes, different alleles, okay? And this happened to cheetahs, okay? Now we know because we could do DNA sequencing and we can look at how closely related these cheetahs are. But right now, all right, so this is the population. Blue, green, yellow, purple. These are all the different alleles and the percentage in the population. Let's say something happens, some kind of catastrophic event happens. It's random, okay, and kills off a huge percentage of the population, okay? It says extreme rapid environmental change. And then all that's left is this. And then this is the new population. See how this new population is different than this? The allele frequencies here are way different than here. Blue was like maybe 45%. Now blue is like almost 80% of the population in green. And the purple and the yellow are gone. So we think this is what happened to cheetahs. And we know this because we can look at their DNA. It says all cheetahs living today can trace their ancestry back to a dozen or so individuals. Dozen, we're talking about 12, that happened to survive a population bottleneck about 10,000 years ago. It says the new population will be dominated by genetic features present in the surviving members. And so that's going to affect the population. All right, we're going to stop here and we'll continue in the next video.